Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we cut back some hosta. So let's go. We are on the east side of my house, and I like to call this flower bed right here my hosta garden. All around me are a whole bunch of different kinds of hosta, and they looked so beautiful earlier this year. There are taller varieties, there are shorter varieties, and there are ones with different variegated leaves. It is just such a beautiful area when the leaves are in their glory. Well, this time of year, the plants are starting to turn over and go by. A frost has not hit them yet, and a lot of times you'll hear people say, you shouldn't cut back your hosta until a frost has hit them. Well, we're due to have a frost here in New Hampshire, zone 5B, within the next week. And what I've found is it's really hard to clean up the leaves right after a frost has hit them. So I prefer to cut back my hosta just before a frost hits the leaves. There are a lot of perennials out there that it's better to leave them up all winter long for a number of reasons. For example, there are certain perennials that you leave up like Rudbeckia or coneflower if you want to feed the wildlife during the winter months, especially the birds. They love to feast on the seeds on certain plants. Also, there are certain perennials that have a hollow stem, and certain insects like bees like to winter in them. But when it comes to these hosta, you want to cut your hosta back because there is no benefit to leaving the hosta up during the winter months. In fact, there are problems if you leave your hosta up during the winter months. For example, slugs and other insects that are not beneficial like to nest and live under the leaf litter during the winter. So you don't want to promote that. Also, you might be carrying disease if you leave your leaves up during the winter months. Now, depending on where you live, you might have to wait a little bit longer before you cut back your foliage from your hosta because the foliage does feed the roots for next year. But like I mentioned, here where I live, a frost is coming. So for me here, it is a perfect time for me to be cutting these back. I want to talk a little bit about the flower bed that we're in. I'm going to pop up on the screen the dimensions of this hosta garden just so you know the size of area that we're working with today. When we first bought this house about 20 years ago, there was really nothing here. It was a patch of lawn and it wasn't doing very well because it's definitely shadier in this area. And then after a few years, we had some ducks and the ducks were living in this area, which is great because they actually fertilized the soil. We enjoyed the ducks while our children were small. But then after we had the ducks, we then turned this area into a hosta garden. And it was a slow process because, as you know, perennials are expensive. So I started getting perennials from family members, from friends. I was looking on the clearance rack, and I slowly started to add to my collection of hosta here. And just like any flower bed, this flower bed is work in progress. I will be making some changes during the next year to 2 years, so be on the lookout for that. So let's talk about what we're going to be using for today's project. I have a pop-up bag here. I like to collect all my litter in here. And when it comes to hosta leaves, you want to make sure that you're very careful with your hosta leaves. If there's any chance that they're diseased or have any sort of virus or anything like that, you don't want to add them to your compost pile. And if you're not sure about that, I don't recommend that you add any hosta leaves to your compost pile. The only time you want to add anything to your compost pile is if you're certain that there's no diseased plants that are going into it. I'll be using small hand pruners to cut back all the hosta leaves. Now let's talk a little bit about that. When it comes to a lot of our plants, there's a chance that those plants might have disease. And when it comes to hosta, there's a disease out there called hosta virus X. I will be very honest with you, I'm not that educated when it comes to hosta virus X. In fact, I only found out about it last year when one of my viewers asked me a question about it. So do your research when it comes to that. But it is very important that you always sterilize your cutting equipment or your shovels when you're working with certain plants. And when it comes to hosta, you just want to be careful that you're sterilizing in between each hosta plant so that you're not carrying a possible disease from one plant to another. So what I'll be doing to sterilize my pruners is I'll be using rubbing alcohol. I won't be diluting it. I'll be using it at full strength. I'm just going to pour it in this mug here. And in between hosta plants, what I'll be doing is just dipping my pruners into the mug that has the rubbing alcohol. And that way I know that I've fully sterilized my cutters. And then when we're all done cutting back all the hosta, the final thing will be just to blow the leaves off the flower bed. Now, you could leave any leaf litter on your flower bed. I prefer not to because the leaves are very large. They tend to mat down on my flower beds. So if I am going to return any leaves to any of my flower beds, I usually prefer to put them through a leaf shredder, shred them into smaller pieces, and then return them back to my flower beds. But for today's project, after we've cut back the hosta, we're just going to be blowing the leaves off of the flower bed. Here's the rubbing alcohol that I'm going to be using. You can use any rubbing alcohol. You can find it very easily at different stores, including the dollar store. So every time I switch from hosta plant to hosta plant, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to dip this right in here. And that's all you need to do is just dip it in there, and that sterilizes your cutting equipment. So I have my rubbing alcohol right next to me so I can keep dipping my cutting tool into there. I'll be the first to admit I'm not very good about sterilizing or cleaning my shovels or my cutting instruments. But when it comes to making videos, I want to make sure I'm teaching the proper way to do it, because I would feel really bad not telling you about Hosta virus X and then you have it and then you're spreading it to all your other plants. When it comes to all the leaves that are falling this time of year, some people like to leave the full large leaves on their flower beds. And I think that's fine. You can definitely do that. But again, with that comes the chance that you're now housing different critters. So you have to do what's right for your garden. For me, I like this particular flower bed to be nice and clean for the winter months. I don't feel that the hosta are going to die during the winter months if I don't cover them and protect the crown. I've never done that with this flower bed, and the hosta have come back just fine. I make a lot of videos showing you how to collect the seeds from different plants. And a lot of my hosta plants, I didn't cut back after they were done flowering. And I know you can collect the seeds from them, but I've never done it. For me, it's just as easy to dig up my hosta and divide them. But just know that you can do that if you want. There are ways that you can let your plant go to seed and collect the seeds from them. I'm just not sure how long it would take for your small hosta plant to become a nice big size plant. I feel like a project like this is so satisfying. It just needed to be done. And I've waited in the past for my hosta to be hit by a freeze or a frost. And it is so hard to cut your hosta back then after that happens. I'm cutting my hosta all the way down to the ground. But if you do want to basically mark where your hosta is in a flower bed and you want to remember where it is, you don't have to cut it all the way down. You can cut it down and leave maybe 1 inch above soil level if you need to just remember where that hosta plant is in your flower garden. When I put this hosta garden together, I was just randomly putting hosta plants in here, and I was trying to do a mix of variegated plants and not variegated plants. But one thing that I want to change next year is I want to put some taller hosta towards the back of this garden bed and put the shorter hosta towards the front of the garden bed. Because the way that it's set up right now, I definitely have much larger hosta that are towards the front of the flower garden area. And it looks pretty, but I also have some shorter varieties that are hidden, I feel. The other thing I'd love to do in this space is I'd like to move around the hostas so that they make more of an impact, because I feel like if you plant hosta kind of in drifts of the same type of hosta, it makes more of an impact. It looks really pretty that way. So I need to think a little bit more about this space and how I'd like to change it. But those are the two main things I'd like to see happen in this area. Now, years ago, I had a walking path that went through the center of this hosta garden. And that was when I had less hosta in here. But what I did enjoy about it was that it just split up the space a little bit. Whereas right now it's one big, huge sea of hosta. And what I found is I can't come out here. I can't walk around in here. And not only that, if there are weeds out here, I can't get to them. In fact, I did notice some weeds in here during the summer months, and I just couldn't access them. So when we're all done cutting back all the hosta today, that's going to be something else that we tackle, is just pulling out some of the weeds that are in here. So you might see that in a future video when we redo this area, that I just put in a walking path just to make it easier to get into the different hosta plants and be able to divide them or weed around them. Now, if you didn't get to your hosta and a frost hit them, that's totally fine. And if you wait another week or 2 weeks after that, you can still cut your hosta back. And typically around that time, you don't even have to cut the hosta back. All you need to do is just pull away any of that dead material and it easily comes away. For me, right now is the best time to be doing this project because when a frost does hit, I'm going to have other things that I'm working on, so I won't be able to tackle this project then. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd like to know if you have plans with your hosta, if you're going to be doing something different for next year. A common question that I get is, what do I do about deer pressure? Because I think we all know that the deer love hosta. And I think you can tell from looking behind me, I definitely live in a very wooded area. So deer tend to come in my garden. I believe the reason why the deer don't bother the hosta in this particular flower bed is because right next to this flower bed is my barn, and the deer probably think that it's a house or some sort of structure, so they don't bother with this flower bed. But very close to this flower bed, as you move further away and go towards my backyard, absolutely the deer do tend to bother those hosta, and that's a problem. And something I'm experimenting with, and I'm going to experiment more heavily with next year, is using a certain soap. It's called Irish Spring soap. Someone told me about that, that you can basically shave it down using like a carrot shredder or something, and sprinkle that around the base of your hosta plants, and the deer then won't bother your plants. So if you have done that yourself, used Irish Spring soap around your hosta, I'd love to know how it's worked for you. I've never sprayed anything. I know that you can buy like deer repellent and spray your plants. For me, I just think it's too much of a hassle, too much work. Another idea that I'm thinking about for next year is putting down some sort of rope or wire, something around the perimeter of my yard. Although it is, we have a lot of land here. It's probably like an acre and a half. So it would be a lot to do. But at least in certain areas, I can try it and see if that deters the deer. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, just working in this flower bed and sanitizing my cutting instrument in between hosta plants. And I'll show you how things are looking in a little bit. All of the hosta have been cut back. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to blow off any leaves that are remaining. Quite a few of the leaves actually blew away once I cut the hosta back, which was really nice. It is a pretty windy day here. But let's go ahead and just blow off any remaining leaves. I have a battery operated leaf blower, and we're just going to be using that. I can finally get to this patch of weeds that I noticed basically the whole summer, but I couldn't easily get in here. So now's the time to remove these weeds just so that they don't keep on spreading. I have no idea what this weed is. Maybe you know, but I wanted to show it has quite the root system to it. So let's get after this. Another flower bed is cleaned up for the fall, and there's still going to be some maintenance to be done from now until the ground freezes and until I get some snowfall. One of the things will be to continue blowing the leaves off this flower bed. And like I mentioned earlier, if I want to, I can take those leaves, I can put them through my leaf shredder, and I can put down a blanket of leaves here. And that will not only insulate the hosta if I want to do that, but those shredded leaves will also break down and be basically a natural compost. So that's something that you can think about for your own flower beds. And then the final thing that I'll be keeping up with is removing sticks, because there are a lot of trees in this area and sticks and twigs do fall in this flower bed. So if I can just keep up with that until the ground freezes and the snow falls, then that would be a great thing. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please consider hitting the like button below, because it will send this video to other people who could also benefit from this information. As always, if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.